I have a wonderful electronic invention I want you to see. It looks something like this.
Welcome to the CTO Studio. I'm your host, Etienne de Bruin. The CTO Studio is where we chat with CTOs building amazing products with incredible teams. Have you chatted with a CTO lately?
This thing on.
Daniel Norman,
Hi.
you've seen my code.
I still consider you a friend. So
I met you, I think we circled each other, but I really met you the night we did a coding challenge together.
yeah, that was at the Go meetup, wasn't
Yes.
it? Yeah.
And, it's an intimate experience, don't you think?
I'd say so. I host a number of them myself.
Pair programming or working together on a coding challenge. I mean, it's I don't know what it is about that, but it's a pretty revealing, vulnerable state.
I see where you're going. Yeah. It's something that I think can really help a lot of people grow, myself included. There's a lot of holes in our respective knowledge that we might not even know are there.
And especially in our personalities.
Yeah.
It's less about the code and more about that vulnerability. So do you feel closer to me because we coded together, or do you feel...
Well, that was so long ago. I don't know. I mean, that was a good start of a relationship, I suppose.
I think we did awesome.
There's so much other stuff since then that colors the perception.
Yes. So Daniel Norman, CTO at gudTech.
Yep. With the umlaut.
Pardon?
Got it. With the umlaut.
With the umlaut.
Umlaut. I got to stay on brand.
Yes, with the umlaut. Is the umlaut in the .com?
We actually have the international domain, yes. You can figure out how to type it.
So technically you can have, it's considered a different character, so it's considered two separate domains.
Yeah, there's a whole silly way of encoding it. It looks really odd.
I'm thrilled to have you at our 7 CTOs podcast. The show does not yet have a name, although by the time this gets broadcast, probably does have a name. But in this moment, we are nameless. Any suggestions for what we should call it? Current frontrunners are CTO Speak, CTO Show.
I like that one.
We just feel like CTO isn't really in the podcast directory. It's not a very popular search.
Which
is either good news or bad news.
Seven innovators,
seven things.
Something with
interesting
with
things.
7.
Anyways, we'll have a name by the time we. This will be a completely redundant conversation.
We'll edit this part out and then we'll replace it.
No editing, Eric.
Well, we'll just dub it in awkwardly over the top.
So, what I love about us is we have a lot in common around our coding, love for coding and building things. Tell us a little bit about how you got to the place of being the CTO at gudTech. I'd love to hear more about the product you're building.
You want the origin story, the company,
Let's keep it more Daniel focused.
Okay.
And a little, just like 2-3 minutes. It doesn't have to be too deep. Just whatever comes to mind.
So, let's see. Early on, I was a kid with a Commodore 64.
Oh, Commodore 64.
And I think it was actually the VIC-20. We burned through 1 or 2 VIC-20s first, and the Commodore 64. Then I think we had a Commodore 128 at some point.
Which had the two modes, right? The 64 and the...
Yeah, it's been a long time. I wish we had kept them. But, of course, they're probably worth a fortune now, wherever they are. But moved on from there and started with a school district program to work on computers. Just going all over the school district and servicing computers. Then moved on to an engineering firm as an internship. It's now it was absorbed into Flextronics. And then another internship at Qualcomm. Moved my way up to MP3.com back in the heyday, 2000, Was there through '04, and then on to an e-commerce company called DJ Network. Stayed there for 7 years, and we built a lot of stuff for their growing organization.
And 5 years at mp3.com.
4 and change.
Wow.
Yeah. That was the last engineer out the door, I think. Their whole saga is kind of interesting for another time.
Tell me about what you're building right now, and how sort of I mean, I know the story a little bit, but becoming sort of the CTO, co-founder of this organization, and then deciding on what gudTech was going to build.
All right. So about 7 years into running a pretty large online retailer, it came to me and my co-founder Sam that there's a market for this, and instead of just building our own software to solve this market problem, this market niche that went unfilled and still a little underfilled at this point, we said, okay, let's have a go of it, and gudTech was born, and we've been building process management for online retailers ever since.
And it's called?
Oh, it's called, so the flagship product is called Retail Ops. We felt it was important to keep the company and the product name separate for cultural reasons. But so Retail Ops runs warehouses and points of sale and order routing and things like that. For retailers, our target market is between approximately 5 and 50 million annual gross sales. We can go smaller and we can go larger, but that's the core of the product.
And tell me a little bit about the decision to keep gudTech and Retail Ops separate.
Yeah, so the thought was at the time, and you know, who knows what the future holds, but the thought was at the time that we would keep them separate so that we could have gudTech be an engineering organization focused on engineering excellence, and then we would produce this product, which we would then brand as Retail Ops. And I think it's gone reasonably well. It's it's something in the model of like 37 Signals or what have you. And ultimately, 37 Signals said, "All right, well, let's go a different direction," and they renamed their different product offerings. So
they became Basecamp, right?
Yeah, they became Basecamp, and I think they spun a few other things off.
So if everything goes well for you, you'll become Retail Ops.
Yeah, I guess we'll see how that goes. Yeah.
So just on a side, the legal entity is gudTech. Does gudTech then wholly own Retail Ops, or how does that work?
Yeah.
Okay, great. So you were a coder. Are you still coding?
A little bit. I wish I was coding more because that's just how I'm wired. But yeah, it tends to taper off as you grow the organization.
So you were a speaker at the 0111 CTO conference, and you know, you and I have spent several hours together in forums, and codes of conduct are always an interesting topic for us. You also have 2 other passions, maybe 3 or 4, but I'd like to just briefly touch on those, which includes the Rust programming language, the Papers We Love organization, general non-existence of time.
That we might need another show for that one.
But let's talk a little bit about as CTOs, we're in an interesting phase. Maybe as general companies, we're in an interesting time in history, specifically around what is considered harassment or what is considered hostile environments, and sort of the enlightenment around employee sexuality and how they view themselves. I've personally found it fascinating, although I know for many people it's not fascinating, it just sucks. We've seen many articles that have just been, just has highlighted sort of real mundane responses to complex issues, which I think we've all expected more from those people and from those organizations. So talk to me a little bit, even if you highlight a couple of your talking points in codes of conduct. What do you find yourself thinking about, and sort of where do you see things going?
All right. Well, so I think in a nutshell, my feelings on the subject boil down to the fact that codes of conduct are something that we should be talking about, something that we should formalize, and have that be a pillar of our organizations, not just as some boilerplate, but as something that we celebrate, and that we even if some of them are aspirational, that's fine, but let it be part of the conversation. Let it be something that is part of the daily discourse. There's part of the water cooler talk, but based on an official sort of document that outlines what are our values. And it may be that some organizations have values that are a little bit more loose, or a little bit more in one direction or another, and that's, depending on your worldview, that may or may not be okay. But let it be clear in bold print what is it that our values are, and by doing so, you don't surprise your employees, you don't surprise anybody that they're coming into this organization knowing that these are the values that you hold, and then it's not just some tribal knowledge. It's fine. Or it's one thing if you have somebody who's reasonably well in tune with the world and espouses values that are respectable and conscientious, but it's not enough just to espouse those values. You have to write them. You have to have that be a totem in your organization. So that's perhaps an overly long-winded.
No, it's fascinating. I think. So what I hear you saying is you don't start with a blank slate. You don't make things up. I think that's part of the intimidation is what is it that I'm not thinking of, or
and it may well be you want to leave some things left unsaid, and that's understandable for a few different reasons. But whatever your values are, don't just talk about them, write them. So that's what it comes down to. And you can I have a whole perspective on certain terminologies about whether you should use guys all the time, and a lot of people disagree with my perspective on this. I don't think we necessarily need to go quite as far as Justin Trudeau's "people kind" statement, but there's a good amount of subtle bias that we have in our everyday language, and to kind of touch on that briefly, whenever you're talking about as an example, whenever you're talking about abstract people, it can be problematic to say the term guys, in my view, because I think that is subtly gendered. If you're talking about concrete people who are in front of you, people who you can name, it's a little bit less problematic. So this is just one little microcosm of the issue that of the issues that face our industry. But it's hard to deny that there are major disparities in gender and various other protected groups that are in our organizations, and it really behooves us to be conscientious about our language and about our values in our organization.
Yeah, I think you have forever ruined thousands of emails I've written lately because the term guys is just so ingrained. I think it makes it harder when even females use the term, "Hey guys." So what I have literally sat there with, "Hey guys," and then delete the guys, and then have to rethink my sentence. In that situation, do we just name like, "Hey John, hey Sally," or "Hey John and Sally"?
Sure. Or one thing, being born and raised in Southern California, it was a little bit of an adjustment for me, but switching to folks, or I know it
folks
sounds
is nasty.
It sounds weird, but
how about y'all?
Y'all is good. It's kind of interesting that some of these folksy terms seem to be less gendered than others. So I'm not trying to be like a gender crusader or anything like that. It's just this is one little subtle
No,
thing
I agree.
that you can do.
I totally agree. I think we had this conversation, I think, almost a year ago, and I think it's just good for awareness, where you just where you just have to stop for a second, and it's not so much the terminology, but it's also considering the grouping that you're making. When I think it's made me sort of think about, well, who am I writing this email to? It's to these two individuals, and I think when there's a big difference even in real life when I say, "Hey everybody," or I say, "Hi Daniel," "Hi blah blah blah." It's like, well, now you're actually addressing people.
Well, I think a lot of people are gonna assume that this is splitting hairs, and in some situations that might be right. The way I feel is that as long as you're being conscientious about it, and as long as you're erring toward or biasing your language and your thought processes away from these sort of subtly gendered terms or subtly biased terms, then that's a good step. So whenever you're referring to abstract groups, I want to hire some guys. I've heard that across the industry. Hey, let's go hire some guys for this. Let's go find some guys for that. Whether it is engineering or investment or whatever, it's not just related to STEM, but we suffer from it worse than most, I think. Just be conscientious about what is the language that you use and who are you excluding from this language. So there's nothing wrong with the word itself. If you're talking to Bob and Alice, call them guys. It's fine. But as long as there's nobody who's being excluded from that.
I recently read an article that the title was "Why Your Organization Needs a CTO and How to Ensure Her Success."
Interesting. You could use their success. And there's some prescriptivists that might take issue with that, and I think we just need to let that go a little bit.
Well, I think it's I don't think we're belaboring anything. I think this is an important time for us to think through these things, and I think as CTOs, one of our biggest challenges is inclusivity or intentional inclusivity. Or adopting values that bring people in as opposed to subtly pushes them away. Yeah. I was amazed one time when I was speaking to someone and she said to me, I asked her for some tips on how to be more inclusive in our meetup group, and she said, "Well, don't say it's pizza and beer." And I just thought, wow, man, these are just biases that are so ingrained. Pizza and beer to some people is code for this is for guys.
Yeah, and it's not a matter of the particular food items. It's that it is interpreted as being certain folks are not welcome.
Yeah, and so you can either be frustrated and say everyone should just get a life, but I think it's too easy to say that. I think we have to be intentional about reconditioning the way we think about these things.
Yeah, and these values subtly shape your organization, and there's nothing that is more impactful, in my view, on the success of your company than the culture that you form. So it helps to be thoughtful about these things. We don't need to go to the nth degree all the time, but just little changes can make a really big difference.
So I think just to put a bow on it, one thing we've often talked about is in the absence of a code of conduct, I think it becomes really hard to communicate to people who are maybe acting contrary to your values if it's not written and stated. So I think what we all learn with company values is to be able to point to the poster on the wall and say, "Are you one of these?" And I think the same goes for code of conduct, just to say, hey, it's not that I have an issue with you. It's, do you think you're fulfilling this code of conduct?
Well, and there will be lots of conversations surrounding, is this particular part wise or is this not wise? have that conversation and make changes if you need to.
I'm going to in the show notes maybe link to your little tool.
Yeah. All right. Yeah. It's just something very simple I threw together to try to spark some thought.
Daniel built a fascinating tool around selecting your, everything from the name of your organization to the type of your organization, and then preloading this document with suggested, clauses in your code of conduct, and then checkboxing. It's really fascinating. I loved it.
Really, it's a social experiment, and I want to see which boxes you uncheck. And it's no judgment, but just think about that as you uncheck. Like, is this something that matters to me? Is this something that is maybe a little bit more detail than I need, and why?
It's very difficult. It is very, very difficult. I mean, conversations around politics, around sexual orientation, around religion, or even the implied belief system. I mean, it's just easier to say to not voice your opinion, it's a transformation for me, is to be able to say, listen, this is what I stand for, and I'm going to be explicit about it.
Yeah.
As opposed to quietly tolerating things that are contrary to that.
Yeah, and it's a fuzzy line, and we each have to figure out where we draw the line for our organization. And I'm not passing judgment on each individual organization. Their circumstances might be different, but at least think about it and talk about it.
So what I want to kind of go into next is just want you to talk a little bit about Rust.
All right.
Only because it's I don't know that much about it. I'm sort of I've been researching Go a lot, and I know that these two aren't juxtaposed, but I haven't really spent much time on Rust other than trying to write my first Hello World little app in Rust. Do you just give us a... So
Sure.
First I want to know, with retail ops, do you have any Rust in production?
Not yet. We are working on it.
Do you have any Go in production?
Yes. Yeah, we have a good amount of Go. And so for our organization, we have a bunch of different languages that we stitch together with the service-oriented architecture. But we're moving more towards Go for the application programming on the server side, and Rust for any sort of systems programming.
Okay. Now, just to provide some context with retail ops, it's very much, you gave this example a few months ago, or one of the scenarios where someone orders a couch set, and not synchronizing, but timing and delivery of everything sort of going through the retail ops ecosystem is quite a challenge.
In our case, one of the applicable challenges is order routing, and making sure that we, given a bunch of different choices for how do we ship the product to you, how do we fulfill that desire, how do we balance our customers' desire to save costs on shipping and handling and logistics, but also to meet the customer's desire. And it turns out this is a computationally hard problem. This is the set cover problem, where we can't always calculate the optimal solution. That as the size of the possibilities increase, it can become intractable really, really fast. So we have to approximate the best solution. And so that would be one example of potentially a systems programming problem, where if I need to calculate several million different possibilities quickly, in Go it probably would be acceptable. So this might not be an ideal example of something you would want to use Rust for, but Rust would be something that you would want to use to write a very high performance piece of your code, a database, a network stack, or something like that. So thankfully, in Go, there have been a lot of systems programming problems that have been solved or addressed, let's say, in that language. Even like there have been databases even that have been written in Go, and they work pretty well. There's CockroachDB and IPFS, Interplanetary File System, a bunch of other examples of systems type programming problems that have been solved in Go. And I think it does a really good job with those sorts of problems if you're okay with the starting assumptions that Go makes, which is that I'm going to have a garbage collector and green threads in everything. And you can even use foreign function interface to bring in to compile a library from Go and bring that into some other programming language environment if you need to, or just in the course of building your application. But it does bring a little bit of baggage with it that it's got a pretty heavyweight runtime, and for your own internal purposes, if you're okay with bringing the Go runtime into your Ruby process, and you're okay with paying the price of doing doing all of the wiring for that foreign function interface, it could work. Whereas if you're looking for publishing a library, that might be a little bit more problematic. Some users of that library might not be okay with it. So it's a case by case basis.
Does Rust have does Rust have a package ecosystem that is or a,
it's growing?
Yeah,
growing.
What would you say to a Golang fanboy, fangirl about why they should look into Rust? Because obviously if you're looking into Go, you're attracted to it as a systems, assuming that you understand that it's not another MVC way of doing things, which it's not.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
But if you are drawn to Go, you're probably already loving statically typed languages, you're loving you're into systems programming, you're loving the concurrency and all that. Why would you say to that person, what would be one or two reasons to just give Rust a go?
Safety from data races. Safety from data races is the number one reason. That anytime you're building mission critical code, there are a whole host of different subtle errors that the programmer can make, and inevitably will make when you have a language that doesn't enforce certain invariants, and Rust is very strict about it's getting your first non-trivial Rust program to compile is
well, I'm still trying to get my Hello World to compile.
Well, I can help you with that, but the experience typically for somebody learning Rust for the first time is a lot of swearing for the first couple weeks, and you absolutely hate the compiler. The compiler is the enemy, and then somewhere around week 2 or 3. Something flips, and you learn to actually love the compiler because, sure, it's being a pain in the neck and preventing your program from compiling. But when it finally does compile, it's probably right. And there's a whole host of different problems that your program is not going to have that it would probably most certainly have in other languages.
So. Is the Rust compiler just opinionated, or is it more
nice way of putting it? It's very strict with regard to the key concepts in Rust are ownership and borrowing. So a value may be owned or immutably borrowed or mutably borrowed, and you cannot mix mutable and immutable borrows.
Immutably borrowed.
Yes. So say, for example, if one function owns a value, it can lend it out to as many different other functions or scopes as is desired, as long as they're all immutable. You can have multiple immutable borrows. Yes. But you can't mix mutable and immutable borrows. So this is the core concept, and there you can go on from there. The lifetime system is very elaborate and confusing for beginners, but the power is in my view, the power is in the ability for the programmer once they finally accept it and get comfortable with it, the power to relax and to say, the compiler's got my back on this. I can deallocate the entire part of my brain that was formerly dedicated to worrying about this. I don't have to worry about that anymore. I can rely on the compiler. I can trust the compiler to prevent that whole class of problems.
Even in my experience with Go, you come to rely on the compiler intercepting sort of some common mistakes you're making.
Yeah, Go has a different approach. Rust is definitely the more rigid approach.
Do more neckbeards show up to functional programming language meetups or to Rust meetups?
I'm not sure I have a good answer for you. I will say that we have a really passionate and knowledgeable group of people that show up to the Rust meetup.
How large is the Rust meetup in San Diego?
It's pretty small still. It varies between 10 and 20 usually. We have it once a month, every second Thursday at 7 p.m. So it's still a niche language, and if you compare Rust like the crate download stats that the Rust manages its public packages under the nomenclature of crate, and that's managed through crates.io. The download stats are blown away by something like npm or other languages. So it's still pretty low in the ranking.
npm, I mean, comparing it to npm.
Sure, but it's climbing, and I honestly think that Rust over the course of 2018 is going to get substantially more adoption, more uptake.
I think Hello World app in Node imports like 1,500 npm packages.
Got to get that left pad.
And so speaking of sort of the quality of person that comes to a Rust meetup, not quality, but just sort of the forward thinking. I don't want to stereotype it, but let's sort of switch gears to papers we love.
All right. Well, the last thing on San Diego Rust is there's a lot of overlap between Rust and C++ in terms of the application domain, and a lot of people in the C++ community seem to be very into C++. There's a lot of entrenchment for various reasons, and some people are gradually switching or broadening their horizons to include Rust, and it tends to be programmers who are really, really in tune with systems programming. So it's a pretty cool group of people. So I recommend coming.
I'm severely tempted.
All right. And so you asked about Papers We Love. So Papers We Love is an internationally syndicated organization started a few years ago, and we host a small chapter here in San Diego. We're about the same size, between like 15 and 20 people show up every month, and
the same group.
No. It's a lot of different people. So we talk about computer science white papers. We have presenters. We have discussion groups, and it's a great group of people also. And it's really people who are self-selecting to talk about CS white papers. I mean, we're a pretty geeky group, but it's just great, and we have some really neat people showing up.
Are these new papers or old papers?
Well, it's a mix. So we actually we just covered the Meltdown paper this past meetup. Really interesting discussion group on that. We've got the Bitcoin paper coming up. We've got I think we've got the AlphaGo paper slated. So those are all examples of some newer papers. But in the past, we've done some really cool older papers. And at least for me, the ones from the 70s are the most interesting.
Is the format, just briefly, presentation style? Or?
Well, it varies. So typically we will have either a speaker who's presenting a digested version of the paper and explaining it, answering any sort of questions about it, or we'll have a discussion group. And it really just depends. Some papers are more conducive to one format or the other, and we try to webcast the speakers. And I think personally that the ones from the 70s are the most interesting papers, just because it was computer science was such a green field back then. They took so little for granted. They had such little baggage. They hadn't even heard of Cap theorem back then, and so everything that they wrote in the 70s was like cleaner and lighter and more fundamental. And in a lot of cases, they were also silly or naive or had some sort of major deficiencies that we figured out since then. But being analytical about the history and the progression of computer science is something that's really personally fascinating to me. And the oldest paper we ever did was really, we were stretching the definition of paper in this case because it was an article in The Atlantic by Vannevar Bush in, I believe, 1946, talking about the future of technology and connectivity. And he makes some really like startlingly prescient predictions about the future that many of which still haunt us today. So I recommend checking it out.
It is fascinating for me sometimes how we think our ideas are new, and then you dig up some paper that...
Oh yeah, they invented it all in the 70s.
We should definitely in the show notes maybe link to 2 or 3 entry-level papers that maybe if anyone's interested in sort of deepening their knowledge, to some papers that you could recommend.
Get started. There's some that are very very accessible. There's one that's I think it's like 2 pages. It's called Reflections on Trusting Trust, having to do with compilers. How much do you really trust your compiler, and why? Your compiler was compiled by another compiler. The long and short of it is there's a whole lot of embodied knowledge in your actual compiler binary that is not present in the code that actually produces the compiler. It is the previous compiler plus the compiler code.
That's crazy.
So there's embodied knowledge that's carried on from this previous compiler. For instance, your compiler,
a mini black hole just formed in the universe.
Your compiler doesn't know what /n means in terms of the code to generate the compiler. There's nothing in the compiler code that knows how to interpret /n as new line. That's from the previous compiler that taught your new compiler that. So that's just one example. That's a really accessible paper. It's like 2 or 3 pages. Go read it. Reflections on Trusting Trust.
I love it. Let's talk a little bit, just as we wrap up. I mean, we could talk about databases and trips to Japan, but
that's another show.
I would just love to talk about your role as CTO. There's that role that we play in the C-suite as executives of the technology.
Mm-hmm.
There is the co-founder role with the ownership hat that we have to put on and be a supportive and also a sort of a force of integrity in the C-suite with the founders. And then, of course, we have to inspire these developers to follow us and to stick with the program.
A lot of hats.
Yes. So I'm asking you to kind of put the CTO hat on and say, like, what, as you reflect on your engineers and on your development team, and as you reflect on the growth of retail ops, what have been some of your challenges or lessons learned that you maybe could pass on to someone else, or just riff a little bit on some of those CTO-ish challenges you've had?
Sure. I think the first one is understanding the definition of the term CTO, because I think there's a lot of different ideas about what it means and the difference between CTO and CIO. And there's a commonly accepted definition in terms of the difference of these things. But as I see it, the CTO needs to innovate in a way that meaningfully provides business value. And that's a really precarious balance, because you have to look down. You have to skate to where the puck is going, right? It's not good enough just to look at your toes. It's not good enough to be a total dreamer. You have to find the elbow on the graph. How much do I innovate? How much do I say, all right, the status quo is good enough? And it's almost certainly not at the extremes. That the correct answer is somewhere in the middle, and finding that is a really challenging process. So finding it, and then I think secondarily the next hardest challenge is once you think you have a vision of something that is sufficiently innovative as to deliver that business value in the long term, but not so far fetched as to be a total moonshot. That you have to figure out, how do I execute this? How do I communicate this? And how to bring the team along with you, so that you're not just dictating, here we're going to do this, this, and this. I mean, I think your metaphor of Fingerman is absolutely perfect, because you want to talk about Fingerman in a little bit?
Fingerman, which I think Daniel just coined, is basically a picture that I drew in one of our meetings where, especially in startups where the CTO started as coder number one, I suppose.
Mm-hmm.
I did that in my startup. I think you did that in yours.
Yep.
And then when we start hiring engineers, we start hiring people who can do work that, if I had the resources and if I could do it, I would do it. But I'm now having to hire someone else to be that extension of me. And then you just keep on doing that as a strategy. And eventually you have this team of 10, 20 people that you see as extensions of you. And that is a failed approach, because
I've definitely fallen victim to that,
and me too. And I think we talked about this before we started, that the only way you get out of that situation is a crisis.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
A crisis where your team doesn't trust you anymore, excludes you, doesn't challenge you. And so the Fingerman is this picture I drew, which you can probably find on LinkedIn somewhere, where you basically have a stick man, where each of the stick man's fingers is another stick man, and even the toes, and so it's a pretty hairy image.
It gave me nightmares of recursive stick men. Yes, but so I think that's a really big challenge, because you can either stand back and just let the team do its thing, and if you've got the right people in the right roles and got things calibrated properly, you'll probably get decent results. But there's a lot of big ifs in there that you need to sort out. But it can be really tempting if you have this in a CTO role. If you have this vision of, here's where we need to go and here's how we need to get there, to get everybody else on board with that, and of course to temper some of the parts that turn out to be ridiculous. Bring the team in on that, and to bring them along with you in a way where they're not just extensions of your fingers, where it is a robust organization where everyone feels like they have agency, mastery, and purpose. That's how you create an organization that is technically successful. And I myself am still working on finding the right calibration, and it's tough.
It's tough.
But that's what I see as the challenge of a CTO is to figure out how to shoot, move, and communicate, how to do all of these things together, to find to swing for the fences, or somewhere that's some ambitious vision that meaningfully serves your business objectives, but not so ridiculously unattainable, and to have this sort of cohesive process by which you actually achieve that.
Yeah, because it's got to be believable both to your peers in the C-suite, but also to your devs. You got to constantly put things in terms that is believable.
And really profoundly, I'm a salesman in my own organization. that I have to sell these ideas that other people might be uncomfortable with, and I think that there's nothing necessarily wrong with taking a more conservative position if your industry is not heavily dependent on technology. You'll typically see like a CIO in that position. I think you could look at a CIO perhaps crassly as more like of an insurance actuary trying to find the least risky sort of solution. What's the least risky choice for database? What's the least risky choice?
I can see the mass unsubscribes happening right now.
Absolutely.
All the subscribers we built up over the years.
Of course. But I will say, so there are organizations where that is absolutely essential, and doing that well is a really steep challenge. That's not quite the same situation as I'm in. I need to be pushing people in a way that's constructive, in a way that achieves our business objectives through that innovative process.
Daniel Norman, just as a final parting thought, what are you reading right now?
Too much technical stuff. A lot of white papers. I need to read more for pleasure. I do really enjoy the New Rustation podcast. I'm getting more into podcasts.
Which one?
The New Rustation by Chris Krycho.
Is it about a programming language?
Yes, it's about Rust. Of course.
Thank you. Have you chatted with the CTO lately? Hi, thank you for listening to the CTO Studio. If you don't mind, take a quick second and please rate and review the show. It helps us a lot. Go to the ctostudio.com for more information on what we're doing at 7CTOs. We also have a video or two for you that could be a helpful resource for you as you're managing your company. So thank you for listening.